Tell me we're ready.
We're ready.
All right. Good evening, Council. Thank you. As mentioned and as on the schedule, we're here tonight to talk about the future actions related to the site of the former Hughes Stadium. I'll just preface this by saying that this is so preliminary. I think it's happened through the community that people feel like there's a lot of done deal going on. And we are in the very, very earliest stages. We are working on acquisition, but we don't actually fully even own the property as of yet. And so knowing that acquisition was going to happen, we went ahead and issued an RFP for an engagement process so that we could at least get this kicked off as we came into ownership. We went through the RFP, we hired Kearns and West, and we put together a staff team. And over the last many months, we've been reaching out to boards and commissions and neighbors and focus groups. And tonight is really about just sharing those findings as we went. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia here for the bulk of the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ginny. And good evening, Mayor and members of Council. As Ginny mentioned, I'm Sylvia Tatman-Burris, Project Manager in the City Manager's Office. And as Ginny also mentioned, we're really at the very beginning stages of our process. And we certainly anticipate this being an ongoing engagement process. So tonight we're going to cover, let's see, make sure. Let me just be.
Go ahead, keep talking.
Cool. So tonight we're going to cover a little bit of a history of the site itself. We'll cover also a little bit of the history of the project overall. We'll then take you through some of what we heard through our community engagement, then talk through a bit of potential next steps, and then turn it over to you all for discussion. We have 3 questions for you tonight, including initial thoughts and feedback that you might have, specific activities that you'd like, perhaps that you'd like for us to explore further, and whether you support staff bringing back a few options for discussion, possibly later in 2023. So I'm going to start with a few project milestones and a timeline for the site specifically. A shout out to Kevin Jones for letting us know that the stadium actually opened in 1968. I was referencing an old presentation that I pulled from. So there was some activity going on in the 50s, but as you'll see from some of the photographs here, that it was a long time ago. So the stadium was continued to be used until around 2016 when the stadium closed for those football games. And then in 2019, a development proposal was considered. And then in 2021, a ballot initiative passed that required the city to acquire and rezone the site to public open land. So we'll go over a bit of that process here in a little bit. The city is currently under contract to purchase the land, and acquisition should be complete in the summer of 2023. Great, thank you. So this slide here shows the Hughes land just after construction really of actually the Horsetooth dams. You'll see that to that lower corner there to the left. And then this was... you can see then, I think what's interesting about this picture is the natural topography of the land that was there. And then in 2017, which is actually just before the stadium was demolished, that's when the stadium was intact. You can see that much of the land was really altered to accommodate a lot of the stadium parking, roads, and the existing regional detention area. I will note that while the stadium's not there anymore, that there is some infrastructure that's still in the ground that could pose a challenge for any future development of uses potentially. So next slide. So I've actually been involved in this project for quite a while, since 2019 in a different role. And back then, staff in the planning department hosted a couple of neighborhood meetings, and including this large open house event where we gathered feedback regarding potential zoning on the site for then what was a proposal for housing development. In addition to some of the boards that you see here in the picture, staff created a half sheet that was available at the open house. And the purpose of the half sheet was to really gather feedback on what people would see as the future potential for that site. While public open lands was not being considered for zoning on the site, many people did indicate, as you see here on the slide, that they wanted POL, or public open lands, along with some drawings for a buffer space that would include some housing, but a buffer for the natural areas to the west. We also generally heard desire for environmental protection and other community recreation opportunities. So following that housing proposal process, a petition was circulated community-wide. We know that people felt strongly about this space being protected, and that the group did work hard to gather a lot of signatures for that process. The ballot initiative passed. That required the city to acquire the property and zone it as public open lands. That has occurred, and we're, of course, working towards acquisition of the property. That petition effort gathered as much as 8,000 signatures, and then the initiative passed with around a 70% approval rate. And as Ginny mentioned, later in 2022, in anticipation of that site acquisition, the staff conducted an RFP process to select a consultant to help with that engagement process. And then at the same time, we actually pulled together an internal staff group, and we created a list of potential focus group conversations. And how we did that to start was to really look at what were some of our engagement processes that we had gone through most recently. That included the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and some other groups that we reached out to. We also met with community groups, and we had several one-on-one conversations that were outside of the engagement that the consultant was conducting. Within those focus groups, all of them were asked the same questions, which also allowed for our organic conversation to occur. So it was sort of, okay, here are some of those questions, but we certainly received feedback and questions outside of those in those conversations. Also, staff continued to ask who else should be engaged in this process. And so we ended up sort of building on those focus groups as we went along, and certainly expect to continue that engagement process into the future. I want to note that the Indigenous Peoples group is indicated here on this slide. That conversation is really ongoing and is preliminary at this point. We're working with our team in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion office to really stay plugged in to their engagement process moving forward. We also conducted 2 surveys. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. That sort of built off of each other based on some of the interest that we got from the first survey. So I know that in the ballot language, some of those terms were not defined. And so we use some of these terms in our first survey. We know we got feedback from folks asking sort of what do these mean and how are these defined? So I wanted to add some context to these definitions from the city side. So natural areas is a program. It's generally, and a department, of course, at the city. It's generally used for natural resource protection. And then there are 2 dedicated sales taxes that currently fund this program. So then we have the public open lands, or POL, zone designation. And so that is from our current land use code. And that is a district that actually includes natural areas and are publicly owned parks. Then the definition in the land use code for parks, recreation, and open lands actually covers sort of a wider set of potential uses. So with that, we took that first survey and really drew upon the ballot language. So for that survey, we actually received a pretty good feedback there with around 2,700 unique responses. So we know also, and you all may know, that these were sent out to the community interest groups in town and to their network. So we did get a lot of feedback from those groups. We also had an other option on the survey, and we got around the same number of responses for those and various interests in other recreation opportunities. And then after closing that first survey, we actually tried to bucket some of those interests by activity level. So that's how we sort of ended up where we did with the second survey, and tried to bucket those activity levels by sort of we called it impact. You could call it other things, but sort of low, medium, and high activity levels. We received generally a high preference for trail connections and improvements, and certainly other recreational interests. In our focus groups, just to sort of summarize those, we heard a lot of interest for new trail connections, emphasizing certainly the value of the adjacent Pine Ridge and Maxwell natural areas that are directly to the west and to the south, and then an interest in increasing our multi-use recreational opportunities in the area. So for next steps in the process, we just want to emphasize again that this is likely to be a multi-year and iterative process that would include more opportunities for community engagement. And knowing that there's really not currently any funding for the future of this project, really Council's next opportunity would be budget discussions that will happen for the 2025 and 2026 budget in November of next year. So with that, I'd like to go back to our questions for this evening and then turn it over to you all for questions and discussion. So thank you so much.
Great. Question? I'll just turn it back over to council. Is that what you want? Just to go to council and ask questions? Okay, great. So they posed 3 questions, and I'm sure in part of our discussion we'll answer them, but if anybody has any comments, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple questions. One is that one of the questions was about level of activity for high, medium, and low impact. How do we define those, and were they defined in the survey?
Yes, thank you for that. So we tried to define them sort of by speaking internally to staff to say what would some of these take, what would be things like parking requirements, level of potential traffic, level of draw. And so we did bucket those mostly according to that. I think you could argue that some of medium could go in low or in high depending on how those were built out. We didn't necessarily define them in the survey, but we did call them out into those buckets on the survey to try to give some clarity to folks who are answering. So, yeah.
Did we give examples of what a high impact, medium, and low impact activity are?
We sort of listed some of those examples out, and then we allowed people to add other potential uses that we didn't list there.
But yeah, we did. Under low, we put things like just restoration, maybe adding a pit toilet. Under medium, I don't remember exactly, but a lot of it was also based on higher impact things requiring more infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I was just curious looking at that. And then my other question is, I've read some feedback that the consultant recommended an 80-acre BMX and mountain bike park, but I didn't see that in the report. Did I miss that? And because I didn't know that they were making recommendations.
Thank you for that question. That was not part of the discussion and not part of the engagement summary. And we just gathered feedback through the focus group process, but they have not made any recommendations, and staff hasn't moved forward with that either.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to make sure I didn't miss that. And then I think overall, I think in my mind, the next kind of steps for engagement would be to start bringing folks together. I think it's great that we've collected, what these kind of individual groups are thinking. And there seems to be some disagreement with who's been outreached. And, I think a lot of community members are just starting to participate and knowing about the engagement. So I think, how do we bring the community together to start an engagement process where we're talking about this land? It is 160 acres, which to me is a rather large parcel. So I feel like it's a community discussion about what can go there. And in my mind, I think we should go away from using the natural areas versus open space. I am still confused even after getting the definitions about what that means, and more just having it as what would you like to see. I think to me would be more helpful, because when I think of open space and natural areas, it's probably different than what anyone else here thinks. And then we're going to get thousands of different opinions in response to those questions. So unless it's helpful in framing it in some way, it seems confusing for everyone. Is there a purpose of kind of differentiating them?
I think it depends on who you speak to. When we talk about natural areas within the city, it is a program with a dedicated tax for a very specific purpose. And so I think it's even hard with those that would very much like for this to be a natural area, because in a lot of that feedback, it's we want a natural area and a wildlife rehab center and the disc golf course and some other things that wouldn't traditionally fit within those parameters. And so Katie Donahue is also on the line if we want to pursue that further. But I agree, coming up with the language and maybe really trying not to get tripped up on the language, but really just talk about what do we want to see, and then we can work to define it within our context as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it's more helpful for folks to be able to just talk about what they would like to see in the space of a public open land and what's allowable, and then figuring out, is it natural area, staff to figure that out, because I think it's prohibitive right now, just the conversation, because of that detail. And so I think right now, just because it's very preliminary, I think we just continue with the engagement. I don't know if I don't have a specific opinion on what should go there. I think we're just starting. And then I think that for your number 3 question, it just seems very early to narrow it down to 2 to 3 options by 2023, unless at the community engagement meetings where hopefully a lot of different groups come together and agree on something. Otherwise, I don't know if we could get it down to 2 to 3 options by later in 2023. Yeah. So thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Shirley?
I just had one question I was curious about. I don't know if it matters. I saw that where fire and flooding on this site are concerned. Did I see that in the
Say it again.
fire and flooding? So would that be an issue? Like, would that narrow down any options?
I will just speak to, I think there were some questions about that early on in the engagement in 2019 about access from the west. Mm-hmm. There's a ditch access road that runs there that could potentially be accessed in the future with some, I think there are ways to deal with that. I think access would be required for some particular uses from a PFA perspective and things like that, but we'd certainly explore those requirements into the future. But I think that's sort of where that question came up at the time. In terms of flooding, I think anything that would go on the site would need to take a look at what is the topography, what is the flooding potential there. There's also that regional detention pond that's for regional stormwater that's there, that's not necessarily to take care of water detention on the site itself. I think there are ways to deal with it, but that would probably come later considerations into the future. But I think that's where those ideas were coming from.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that would restrict some of the ideas. So I don't really have any more questions, but I just want to say that I feel like this is one of the better survey and engagement processes I've seen. So I think you did a good job. I think that this area is a potential transformational project that we always talk about. And so I'm really excited to see what comes of this, because I do think that this could be whatever we put there could be transformational for our city. I like there was a couple of thoughts in there. Deliver on as many uses as possible as stipulated in the ballot language. Highest need combined with best use. And I just think that should be the overarching thought in our mind as we're looking at these. And I also wanted to say that I like that the people with cognitive and mental disabilities was mentioned in this, that that's not being left out. And I mean, of course, we mentioned all the other, groups that are sometimes not represented, but so I liked that, and so I'm I agree with Emily that we just keep moving forward with engagement. I think that I have 2 to 3 or more options because like I said, I think this could be a transformational project. And so I hope we think outside the box. I hope we gather all the input, and I hope we find something that the whole community can live with. I know that's a big order, but
Great. Next. All right, got some questions. So thanks again, and thanks for all this early work. And it is, especially if it's not going to appear in the budget till fall of 2024 with possible implementation in 2025. So thank you. This is emphasizing again, very preliminary. I just had some more kind of nuts and bolts, and maybe you don't have the answers to these, so probably not, but just something to keep in mind. So, those tunnels are out there still underneath the former football stadium. So I'm just starting to think about budget implications and any potential mitigation. And I think the purchase dollars came from general fund because it was a ballot initiative, which makes sense to me. But do we have any ballpark idea how much that's going to cost? And if we don't, that's fine.
We don't, and we're in the process. I was going to see if Tyler wanted to mention the funding for it and the fact that we're in that stage where you get to, I can't say the word, inspect the property before we sign it, close.
Yeah, we're good evening, Mayor and Council. Tyler Marr, Deputy City Manager. We are in the final stages of acquisition of the property itself. We're under a purchase and sale agreement with Colorado State. And we're doing what's called a phase 1 environmental assessment and some titling work. Okay. That gives some initial insight into what the conditions are. Doesn't necessarily come with a cost, Mayor, to your point. I think that's something that staff with more expertise to me can speak to. Right. But did also want to just make clear, and we'll be to council next week for an appropriation. That to start, per previous conversations we've had with council, we're going to be doing a 50-50 split between the general fund and the natural areas fund until such time that we know what the final use of the site will be. And then we've made a promise to shore up in either direction what that might look like.
Oh, thanks for that clarification. I'd forgotten it was 50-50. I appreciate that. So just another question that's just a curiosity of mine. So until there's a dedicated use or decided plan, do we have liability issues out there, or what's going to be going on out there? And do we patrol it, or once we take it from possession from CSU, and until we decided an intentional use, what's going to happen?
So we're not looking to make any changes fast. I don't think the community will see changes out there much at all. Right now, our Parks Department does some trash collection around the disc golf course. There is a portalet in the parking lot out there that we maintain and have been maintaining. Since it won't be really considered under, again, city context, natural areas, or parks, our natural areas rangers and parks rangers will not be out there, just like they're not out there now. And we certainly don't anticipate, issuing any special events permits or having that parcel being available for that. Like we've been trying to think through some of these things as we go. And not to say that we've thought of everything that might come up, but for the most part, I think the community will see it just stay the same as is.
Thanks. That just cleared up some curiosity I had. So I'll answer your questions. I think I just said number one, I just gave you some thoughts. You've done a great stakeholder process, and it's going to continue, I'm sure. Activities, I think we need to follow the ballot language for the activities. That's what the voters said, but they're pretty all-inclusive there, including what I've heard people talking about. And to 2 to 3 options that can include short-term and long-term opportunities for discussion later in 2023. Possibly if you're ready. I mean, if the engagement goes that way. But I also think at some point, and I'm sure I'm not telling you your job because I'm sure you've thought of this, to get everyone in the room to see if the people who envision a use out there, because it is such a large parcel of 164.56 or something like that. Because I think it feels like, I'm sure it'll grow and change with the ideas and those sorts of things, but it feels like it wouldn't be a council to just choose like an either or proposition, right? It feels like it should really come through a compromise from the people, or some way more discussion from the people to bring something to council that they would like to see. Those are my comments. Yeah. Susan or Kelly? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Tricia. Thank you. I'm sorry, Tricia.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for all the work that you've already put in here. I absolutely agree with what Emily and Jenny have already said. I think it's and Shirley as well. It's a large parcel, and hopefully we can look to the community to help guide what we want to see happening there. And I think it's going to be a compromise. There's so many diverse interests of how we can use this land to best ability for the city. But yeah, I think maybe 2023 is a little bit early, but if you have a plan that you can bring back to us after a lot of public engagement, that sounds great. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm sorry I didn't see you there. Susan or Kelly? Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you. I think the last thing we currently need is another divisive issue in the community, but I think we can get this, and hopefully we'll get this right if we're deliberate, and it appears we're going to be deliberate in coming to this. I think we can preserve the intent of the initiators of the ballot measure and get a bike park, but for me it would be in a different location, in a more appropriate location that I'll speak to in a minute, and I'm certainly committed to doing my part to make that happen, whatever form that may take. And then I just think that we're not really talking about the people that did all this work in a very difficult time during COVID to gather the signatures, and then to do a campaign that did have opposition, and then to win so substantially at almost 70-30, 69-31. We're into data around here, rounded up at 69-31. And hardly anyone, I think, that voted yes, thinking it would be a large-scale, regional, recreational event center or entertainment complex. I just don't think that was on their mind, the 70% that voted yes. So I have a slightly different take, in that I think some of the work should go parallel to this, so we can make a bike park a reality, a very good bike park a reality. We should be pursuing and examining other potential sites in Fort Collins. I have some in mind, but probably isn't wise to mention them, and to see that we can have less impact on that site. Because what I'm concerned about, I understand that some of the sites degraded. I understand that. But as a person that spent more than 40 years, actually, that's just the time following the council, but 50 years here and studying it before that in wildlife and habitat and all those things starting in 1968, actually. It's the impact on the high value natural areas in close proximity to that I'm most concerned about, not the existing site as much, although it has great potential for restoration long term, not all of it. And sometimes that does take a long time. Lands we bought 30 years ago still aren't restored because it takes time and money to do those. So I'd like you to also work with people when you're doing outreach, because we have a very intelligent. The residents that live here pick stuff up quick. They're very engaged. I think it would help if you'd have primers on wildlife connectivity, wildlife habitat fragmentation, movement corridors, biodiversity, the hundreds of species of plants and animals that are there as a grounding. I agree with the council members as we dig deeper in this issue. It would be good to have a basic primer. It doesn't have to be big about values of ecotones where two habitats come together, as the Sierra Club and Audubon pointed out, and that's the most wildlife diversity there. The impact, talking about adjacent and proximity to high value natural areas, and the fact that all of us, including if I go walk in a natural area, I'm having a negative impact. That doesn't mean I shouldn't be allowed to go there. I played a role in getting that so that we could, but for people to recognize that has an impact. It doesn't mean we shouldn't go there, or I shouldn't go there on a bike or on a horse or walking. It would be good, though, if we have basic understanding of some of the impacts that we're talking about, especially when you're talking a regional draw that will involve bathrooms and parking and lighting and those kinds of things adjacent to high value and natural areas. So I'm not one that's always looking for bigger and more or even transformational, because it could be a transformational project to add some things out there, but to improve what's there and not to damage what we already have. So I'm not always looking for bigger and more. I think that's part of the problem we have. And I did have a suggestion for next steps, and I think it's indicative of the problem we face. Staff is proposing continuing to work with council and the public to determine potential activities or improvements to pursue in future budget cycles. Improvements is in the eye of the beholder. Some might think a new road through a wetland was an improvement. I wouldn't view it that way. So that's a very problematic word to me. And then also nowhere in that does it talk about conservation, which I think is indicative of part of the problem we're facing, but we have the time to get it right. So I'd suggest we work on that wording that you mentioned potential activities and improvements, but there's no mention of conservation or habitat or wildlife or any other thing. I think that's seriously problematic to me. And just gonna check, because I think that's what I've got, unless I need to say more later. I think we should look at finding another spot for a regional draw so that we don't come up short in the current site to do it correctly. And Boulder, by the way, the park that's talked about in such positive terms was consciously not placed by Boulder near habitat or in habitat. It was placed in a location that people are pleased with, far away from impacting natural areas and wildlife and habitat. So if Boulder can do it that way, I think we can do it that way. So that's my starting point. I like the way council's approaching it and in a deliberate manner, and I'm hopeful we can maybe get it all right. If you guys do decide to go looking for where there might be other locations, some dollar figures as we approach budget might be helpful too. And I don't know what a bike park costs, and I don't know what lands cost well, actually I do, but it depends on the location and those kinds of things. So as we flesh this out to see what our options are versus bike park, I'm all in. Bike park in this area, I'm all out. And it'd be nice if council, at least, whether I come up on the short end of that or not, at least to be presented with other options. It would be nice to have that since we've got enough time and aren't rushing it for August. And I'm sure glad council members brought that up. And good for you guys, by the way, because I'm the one always saying we go too slow. So good for you to say August, but I think this one we need to take our time and really be deliberative. So that's on us. You were just doing the kinds of things that we want, which is getting us things in a timely manner. So it's a good start, and thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we said later. August would be way too soon.
I thought, you didn't say August?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I think we just said later.
Okay.
Who wants to go first? Shirley?
I just wanted to add to
Sure.
Kelly's, because he was talking about the primer. I keep hearing that there would be trade-offs with the natural areas. Like if we did this natural area, we might not be able to use our money in other natural areas. So one, I'd like to know if that's true. And two, I would add to Kelly's primer that if there are trade-offs, what those trade-offs would be. Does that make sense? And then, as always, public-private partnerships are great. Emily?
Yeah, Kelly, can I ask you a question about something you said? You mentioned a regional entertainment event center. I guess I didn't see that in the feedback. Could you explain what you were referring to?
The things I heard from the public feedback at council was a regional draw, perhaps of not only of a bike park, but of a cross country track as well. And then there was a skiing venue, and I might be forgetting one other, but to me that's kind of a recreational or entertainment complex, and that takes significant parking lots and infrastructure and plumbing and those kinds of things. But no, good questions back and forth. If we question each other and all that, that's great. So that's what I kind of envisioned and heard, that the people that want it don't want to do a little pretend thing, but want it to be a regional draw. And I don't mind a regional draw, just not in that location. And that's my best shot at that.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think, and the reason that I am open to, what we have heard back is that while Boulder has developed a bike park in a certain way, and I'm not saying what can go there, but anything could be in Fort Collins way. So I guess I'm trying to stay away from the assumption that I know what all these activities would look like. Do I know that something like a bike park would have to have lighting in a parking lot? And I don't think, I don't know. So I just wanted to clarify, because I think that there are uses, and I just don't want community members and myself making assumptions about what those activities would look like. So I think it was just helpful clarifying what you meant by that event center, because I thought maybe that was in there and I didn't see it. So thank you.
I'll go. There's a couple of things. I think that one of the things I wanted to ask was maybe you could help me out with the two surveys, because as I was looking at the survey, the first one has the open lands, parks, natural areas, it's wildlife rescue, so forth, But then the second one, and natural areas, the second survey, though, said high preference voiced for bike park, Nordic skiing, cross-country running course, etc. How were they different? How were they so different that your first survey said, yeah, we want to kind of go in keeping with the ballot language, and then the second one was, no, we want these other items?
The first survey also had a write-in option. So of those 2,700 unique participants, the majority also had write-ins. And so we took those write-ins and kind of grouped them. And we also took what we heard in the focus groups as far as activities to try to do those groupings by, again, what we called low, medium, and high impact.
Mm-hmm. For the second one?
For the second survey.
For the second one, okay. Because it seemed to lose the ballot language in the second one. So that's why I was just curious how that appeared. And then when we were in our council meeting last week, those very ones came in the tsunami of community comment that we heard about the bike park, the Nordic skiing, cross-country course. And it was just, I don't know, I was caught off guard. I thought, whoa. And maybe that's when I think your introduction was, some people think that maybe this is a done deal. I think that demonstration of passion was probably a good indicator for some people that, okay, well, I guess, maybe that's the direction we're going. So when you did your oh gosh, what was it? The people who did the survey, what do you call that? Your consultant. What did you go through to what process did you go through to find the consultant that you used?
Thanks for that question. So we worked with our communications office to get an RFP out for general engagement at first. And then Jeannie and I worked on a proposal for the Hughes specific project and put that out to 3 of the consultants that were selected through that RFP process. We interviewed them and sort of scored their proposals back to us and found that Kearns and West really fit our process best, and sort of had the experience that we needed to bring to a project of such significance to the community. And so we did select Kearns and West that way through that competitive process. And so that's how they ended up being selected through our internal selection process.
Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think of her name. Morgan Lemaire. Is that who? Am I pronouncing her name right?
Morgan Lomley. Yeah.
Lomley. That's what it is. I don't know where I got the other name. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Has she before she was part of the consulting group? Do you know what it was that she did? What she was involved with?
So Morgan's on the line. I'm not going to ask her to respond, as is Angela, who oversaw this whole process. We didn't ask. We went by what they proposed in their proposal and the outline that they had for us, which was very comprehensive and very solid. They've done a lot of work all over the place. And then in working with actually Morgan and Angela and Caitlin as well, they really came into our staff team and we developed our process together. Whether it be the survey questions, when they did focus groups, we had both staff and Kearns and West in those meetings as well. And we just really relied on them for the sounding board as a neutral party coming in, for their expertise in pulling together that engagement as we went forward, and then really helping us create these final engagement reports and graphics.
So very qualified folks. There wouldn't be any prior involvement with bike groups at all?
Based on the types of projects and really the engagement that Kearns and West does, it would be probably hard to find a group that hadn't worked with bike parks or with conservationists or with open lands folks. I don't know that would be a criteria we would want to screen for necessarily.
Right.
If there was and I think they had they have an overarching way they want to run their business. If there were a conflict of interest, I would have full trust that they would disclose it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it probably wouldn't be, a conflict of interest, but it might be an interest, and so I just wanted to make sure that we're working with folks who are in fact looking at all sorts of different options. And I think last week, probably for me, I have to admit, it spooked me to have that number of people come who were obviously very mobilized. And I would have to say too, before I get into the other thing I was going to say, I need to address it, because one of the things that I heard about later on from various constituents is that there were a number of folks there who were very offended by the ageism comment that was made by one of the young people about the people who were looking to protect Hughes tended to be older folks. And then I appreciated when the young person called in and said, well, in fact, she was a part of the effort to gather all of the signatures. And in fact, she had a lot of young friends who helped her too. And she kind of countered that comment. So I'm hoping that as we move forward, that isn't going to be an issue, that it's the oldsters versus the youngsters, the bike park versus the folks who are trying to protect, Hughes. And it just alerted me to the fact that it's something that could possibly come up. But I'm sorry, did you want to say?
Well, I just want to say, and I thought of a way to say it well, and as staff, we really abide by this, and I know Kearns and West do too. We're invested in the process, not the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
We're just really focused on the process. We can't control how our residents will respond or how they'll organize or how, any of that. So we just have to stay really focused on the process.
Okay. Well, as we continue and we discuss it, I think those who favor a more open space would argue that that provides a form of mental health and serenity, and very as much as riding a dirt bike, on a course. And so, I just want to make sure that we put that out there, that both parties have their values and are valued. But I would then say something very similar to what Kelly said, and that is that having the bike park is an extremely valuable part of Fort Collins. And I, too, would like to see it not necessarily at Hughes, but making a concerted effort to make it happen. The reason why I really cringe when I think about putting it at Hughes is because I did go and visit Belmont on Sunday. My husband and I took a trip out there. It was a nice drive, beautiful day. And so we went to Belmont because, how many times did we hear how wonderful it was? A little bit far, but a wonderful place to be. And so we went and we looked, and it's vast. It's a vast area of carved hills, moving lots and lots of dirt and creating this very, very fun park. But as Kelly said, Boulder, and I don't want to say Boulder did it, so should we. That's not the point. But they had the foresight to say, there's our foothills, there's our natural area, and here's a great place to put this wonderful park for people to use for the bike park. It's adjacent to a mobile home park. There are businesses on the rise, on the ridge. And the cool thing, and this is what I would love to see happen for us when we do it right, is it's also combined with a dog park. And I'm thinking, why can't we, instead of, let's just build a bike park, why can't we envision even better than that? Why can't we envision a bike park and a dog park? And then adjacent to that was the coolest little play area for the kids, so that while the older ones are riding the bikes, the younger ones have this wonderful little play area. So it was delightfully done. It's beautifully done, and I have to compliment Boulder on what they did. But they did it away. They did it off the diagonal. So rather than taking off and then driving all the way through town, and when we're so worried about cutting down on the number of cars and keeping our air as pure as possible, it's right off the diagonal. So they don't have to go anywhere through Boulder. They just take off the diagonal, and there it is. So having been there, I can envision us doing something really, really cool. In bigger, better. And at that point, it could be a regional use. And so the other thing that I saw, that when I wanted to mention, and then I lost my picture, but it was, let's see, because I keep forgetting what it's called. Oh, there was a big sign there, and it says, "This project funded in part by Great Outdoors Colorado through funds from the Colorado Lottery." And I was reading in the materials that we do that too, but why can't we apply for that, get grants for that? I also saw all of these stones that had this bike group, the of the Rockies. What is that? Where you break your bones and they fix them?
Orthopedic Center. Orthopedic Center.
Yeah, orthopedic. Thank you. Orthopedic Center of the Rockies, making their sponsors. REI was there. Their sponsors, and I'm thinking, let's really move on that and create something super cool. I love the idea of the bike park, but I think we can do even more. And that's what I'm hoping that we might look at too, as we continue to discuss the possibilities, for not necessarily for Hughes, we can talk about that, but let's focus on a bike park that rocks, best in the region. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thanks, Susan. Tricia?
Yeah, just could I ask a quick question? Could you remind us what the ballot language stated? What people were voting yes for?
Yes, thank you. Ginny's going to pull that slide up here real quick, and we can get to that. So I don't have the full ballot language, but basically it states that it should be used for parks, recreation, and open lands, natural areas, and wildlife rescue and restoration.
Okay, thank you. I know that we as a council are always very careful to never try to put words into each other's mouths, and I think that should go for the community as well. And so we don't really know what part of that people were voting for when they voted yes. I just want to say, so we don't know if it was parks, if it was recreation, open lands, or natural areas. So I just want us to be cognizant of that as we move forward, that we did have 70, almost 70% of Fort Collins voting in favor, but again, we're not really sure what aspect of that appealed to each of those voters. So I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind as we move forward. And then I just, in response to Susan's statements, I just want to say that for me, it was just so heartwarming to see all these kids be passionate about something and want to be involved in the public engagement process and come out and let council know how they feel about something. So I just want to make sure that they are aware that council was pleased to see them last week and to keep engaging with us, at least from my perspective. And that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Charlie, did I see you?
So I just want to clarify. So when we say 70% of Fort Collins voted for the ballot language, don't we mean 70% of the people who voted, not 70% of Fort Collins? Okay, I just want to clarify that because I do think there's some voices out there on either side of this issue that maybe didn't vote that might need to be heard. And then, Susan, I was just curious to why you brought up the question of the person. Like, how did you know that, Morgan, was that her name? How did you know that she might have had bike connections? Like, what sparked that interest?
Just community chatter.
Okay.
That's, just things that you hear in the community.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor. Shirley, great point you brought up, so I'd like to address it so I can annoy another viewpoint on this particular issue, which is I agree on the natural areas, the opportunity cost of natural areas. I'm not proposing this all as a natural area. I support the exploring, emphasis on exploring, as we're all saying. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, I believe there's a cut the ribbon for the golf course, the Frisbee golf course, and a bunch of other things. So I'm anticipating, from my own viewpoint, uses, but less intense uses, but not all being funded by natural areas or restored as a natural area or anything. And it's just, I just want to make that clear so I can annoy everyone tonight. But that's not my vision of it at all, because it's not necessarily the best use of the money, although my view might be dramatically different than a lot of us around the table or in the community about the extent of what goes on there. But it's not my position even now that it's mostly going to be funded with natural areas or restored. I think there were some other things that we even talked about in the ballot language, like the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and those kinds of things that we need to explore. So no, I just made my life even more difficult, but that's what I believe, that's what I think, and that's where I am at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I've heard you say that before. It's just I keep hearing that there's trade-offs, and I just want to make sure if there's trade-offs, we understand what the trade-offs are, right? And you said something else. I was gonna, oh, the wildlife. I think that would be a good example of a public-private partnership that we need to consider out there. So.
Great. Are there further comments or questions from council? Do you guys feel like you have enough answers to your questions, or do you need more?
I think we do. We will we'll summarize for memo and packet. I think this has been a great conversation. I very much appreciate it. It reiterates that we're at the very beginning stages of this, and I do like trying to bring folks together. Right? We need to not make this an either or proposition, because those have winners and losers, and so let's find a way to get winners out of the whole thing as we go. I also heard that council isn't in a hurry for us to rush back with these. We have some other large scale projects we're trying to get through in the engagement space, so we'll take that to heart, but we will not let it drop, and we'll let you know what our plan is. So thank you.
Great summary. Thank you. Would council like a 5-minute break while we switch topics? Okay, great. We'll take 5. Thanks.